Imagine standing in a muddy town square in 16th century Europe. You're watching a man, not a king, but a friar, standing on a wooden crate, shouting like a carnival barker. He's holding up a scrap of parchment, waving it in the air. He tells the crowd, mostly illiterate peasants who can barely afford bread, that this piece of paper is a literal ticket out of hell for their dead relatives. And the terrifying part, they believe him. You watch a farmer step forward and hand over a bag of coins, a tenth of his entire year's harvest, just to buy this indulgence. It looks like an act of desperate faith. But if you follow the path of that coin, the story changes completely. It doesn't stay in the parish to help the poor. It travels hundreds of miles to Rome, merging into a massive river of wealth that isn't buying salvation, but building towering cathedrals and funding private armies. It creates this jarring realization. You aren't looking at a spiritual institution anymore. You're looking at the world's first global financial empire, centuries before Wall Street existed. They had successfully monetized every stage of human existence, charging fees for birth, marriage, and even death. But the irony of this perfect business model is exactly what we need to talk about. Because the moment they turned faith into a transaction, they didn't just get rich. They accidentally planted the bomb that would blow their entire monopoly apart.
That image is incredibly powerful, and it really does set the stage perfectly for what we're going to get into today. Our mission for this deep dive is really to follow the path of that coin, not just from a town square in Saxony,
but into today.
Exactly, into the modern era. We're going to explore how belief systems, and that can be anything, old religious doctrines, new political ideologies, social causes, how they are strategically monetized.
By the elites running the show.
Yes, by the institutional elites. The goal is always the same, whether it's the 16th century or the 21st. It's about maintaining power, extracting resources from the base, and funding the infrastructure of the people in charge, that managerial class.
Okay, so let's unpack that if you just strip it all down. The core mechanism seems to be selling something intangible hope, or maybe relief from fear, to the vulnerable.
To the masses.
To the masses, yeah. And using that money to fund the infrastructure of the powerful. It's basically a wealth transfer disguised as a moral service.
Precisely. And when we look back at the medieval Catholic Church, right before the Reformation, you are not just looking at a religion. You are studying a highly sophisticated global financial empire. It's a blueprint for resource extraction that predates modern banking by centuries.
And it was completely systematic, right? This wasn't just like passing a collection plate on Sunday.
No, it was institutionalized. It was codified into law, woven into the fabric of everyday life. The main engine was the tithe.
A tenth of
every single thing produced, every harvest, every profit an artisan made. It was non-negotiable. But that was just the start. They then layered on this comprehensive system of fees.
For literally everything.
For every essential spiritual service. They monetized the entire human life cycle.
So you're born, you pay a fee for baptism.
Correct. Necessary to even enter the community.
You get married, you pay a fee to legitimize it.
And you die, and there's a fee for burial. As you said in the opening, even death was taxed. And then on top of all that, you had the indulgence market.
The ultimate product.
It really was the most efficient layer of extraction. It offered spiritual certainty, forgiveness, less time in purgatory for your loved ones. I mean, think about it. It was selling peace of mind about the afterlife.
The scale of that is just staggering. This wasn't local money staying in the local church.
No, not at all. This was a continental flow of wealth. It pulled resources from the poorest farmers all the way up to kings.
And all that money, all that gold and silver flowed in one direction.
Straight to Rome. And this is the crucial part. This was not charity. It wasn't for the local parish or feeding the poor. This huge centralized pot of capital was for institutional preservation, political power, and of course, massive building projects.
Like St. Peter's Basilica, which ironically was the whole reason for selling the indulgences in the first place.
Exactly. They needed to finance the new St. Peter's, so they ramped up indulgence sales across Europe. That building, along with funding papal armies and political deals, made the church a true global financial power long before, say, the Dutch or the English got into modern banking.
To really make that feel real, though, let's zoom in. Let's talk about the human cost. Let's talk about Thomas, the stonemason.
Right. We have to see the machine through his eyes. So Thomas is a craftsman. His hands are literally building the churches, but he's completely shut out from the inner circle managing the money. He's the base.
He's the source of the capital.
It is. And he's facing a common tragedy for the time. His daughter is sick.
And then the local friar shows up, someone like Johann Tetzel. And he's not there as a counselor, is he?
No, he's a financial agent. He uses this very sophisticated theological language to reframe the tragedy.
How so?
The friar basically frames the daughter's sickness not as, a random act of nature, but as a kind of spiritual debt, a debt the family owes.
A debt that can only be paid off with cash.
A debt that can only be settled through a financial transaction, the indulgence, paid for with a silver coin, authorized by some distant elite in Rome.
And we're talking about a week's wages for him? A huge chunk of his family's money, handed over for a piece of paper he probably couldn't even read.
For Thomas, it's a genuine, desperate act of faith. He believes he's buying relief for his daughter, for his family.
But for the institute.
For the institution, that coin wasn't grace. It was revenue optimization. It was a standardized, highly effective way to funnel local wealth into the central bureaucracy in Rome. It was, for a time, the perfect business model.
But that's the thing, isn't it? The perfection of the model was its fatal flaw. You can't just keep hiking the price of salvation forever.
That's the central irony. The more aggressive, the more visible the monetization of faith became, the more people started to question it. The second faith becomes a transaction. It's subject to market logic and moral critique.
And people could see the wealth gap with their own eyes. The stonemason giving his last coin versus the cardinal in Rome living in a palace.
That contrast became impossible to justify. The outrage over indulgences was really the spark that lit the Protestant Reformation. For the average person, it was less about deep theology and more about, financial corruption.
And that explosion split Europe. It shattered the church's monopoly on power.
And critically, it destroyed its monopoly on wealth. The central lesson from this whole historical blueprint is pretty stark. When any belief system gets tied to money, power concentrates in the hands of the managers. And corruption isn't a risk anymore. It's an inevitable outcome. The mission becomes secondary to the money.
Okay, here is where it gets really interesting for today. Because that pattern is just so persistent. If the medieval church monetized the fear of hell, how do modern movements, political parties, big nonprofits do the same thing? What's the modern indulgence?
The modern indulgence is the monetization of existential fear or ideological salvation. Campaigns and causes today, they strategically manufacture and then target fear.
Fear of what, though?
It could be fear of the other, fear of democracy collapsing, or, and this is a big one, fear of societal collapse, the secular apocalypse, climate change, social breakdown, you name it.
And the mechanism is the same, just faster, digital.
Exactly. Instead of a friar on a crate, you get these high-volume, emotionally charged emails, urgent please, countdown timers. And the message is always the same. Your immediate financial sacrifice, your $5 microdonation, is the only thing standing between us and total disaster.
The donation is framed as a moral act, an imperative.
A moral imperative, yes. And this all works because of what we can call the decoding of political language. It's a sophisticated use of language designed to justify pulling resources from the base to benefit the elites running the show.
Let's break down that decoding. So just like the friar told Thomas his poverty was a spiritual debt.
Modern political language frames things like poverty or inequality or climate change as these moral failings that can only be fixed through one thing.
A transaction.
A donation.
A donation, a membership fee, buying the merch. The narrative cleverly shifts focus away from, say, complex structural solutions and towards simple transactional participation.
Yeah.
And that framing justifies the enormous amounts of money flowing into the organization's infrastructure.
The offices, the staff salaries, the consultants, all of it. The moral urgency of the cause completely hides the fact that it's a financial transaction funding a bureaucracy.
This brings us to the idea of ideological entrepreneurship, because these aren't all just cynical grifters, right? The people who start these things, they often genuinely believe in their cause.
Oh, absolutely. They have strong, real beliefs about the right way to run a school or provide therapy or save the planet, and that choice, the choice to be a nonprofit, is driven by ideas, not pure profit.
But that's what's so interesting. That ideological commitment actually gives them a competitive advantage.
It does. It seems counterintuitive, right? Why would giving up profit be an advantage? But it's all about signaling, especially in markets where you can't easily judge the quality of something beforehand.
These are what economists call experience goods.
Exactly. Think about choosing a school for your kid or a specific kind of therapy. You can't really know if it's good until after you've already paid for it and experienced it.
You can't get a free sample.
You can't. So you, the consumer, you have to rely on signals of trust. And the founder's passionate commitment to a specific ideology, whether it's Montessori teaching or a particular religious doctrine or a hardcore environmental philosophy that acts as a powerful signal of trustworthiness. You're not just buying the service, you're buying the ideology that comes with it.
The ideology is the brand. It's the guarantee of quality.
It is. And the nonprofit structure itself reinforces that trust. By legally eliminating the possibility of taking home residual profits, the founder is signaling, I'm not just in this for the money. It solves what's called an incentive compatibility problem for customers who feel uninformed and are looking for someone they can trust.
So instead of a cash return, their reward is something else, this psychic capital.
That's the key. The psychic reward of seeing their belief system spread, of implementing their ideas in the world. And that investment, that psychic capital, is highly specific to their cause.
Which sounds great, but it also makes them very rigid, doesn't it? If all your capital is tied up in one very specific ideology, you can't just pivot to something else if the market changes.
You can, and that's the crucial economic point. The supply of these true ideological entrepreneurs is what we call inelastic. Their capital is specific. It's hard to hire a deeply committed priest to suddenly go run a casino no matter what you pay him. His psychic capital just doesn't transfer.
And this creates a huge problem for governments or policymakers who want to, encourage more of these good services.
It's a massive problem. If a government comes in and tries to use standard tools like throwing huge subsidies at a nonprofit sector, it can backfire badly. If you suddenly make the financial returns in that sector too high, you don't necessarily get more true believers.
You get the opportunists, the for-profits in disguise.
Precisely. You get people who are just using the nonprofit label as a way to get rich while pretending to care about the ideology. And that influx of, mercenaries, it erodes the very trust that made the nonprofit advantageous in the first place.
So state intervention, even with the best intentions, can actually destabilize the whole system. Just like the church's obsession with money ended up discrediting their spiritual authority.
It creates what are called adversarial profit opportunities. It leads to this destabilizing politicization of everything. Often the best policy is just neutrality, letting these ideological markets function on their own rather than trying to rig the game, which just creates new pots of money for new elites to fight over.
Let's use that idea of disillusionment and go back to the 16th century for a moment, to that point where the machine became visibly separate from the mission. Let's talk about Matteo the scribe.
Matteo's a perfect example. He's an idealist. He travels to Rome, to the papal curia, the heart in the Catholic world, and he's expecting to find, a center of charity and spiritual work.
And what does he find instead?
He finds a prototype multinational corporation, a giant bureaucracy, the curia, that's basically functioning as a financial clearinghouse.
Not charity, but resource management.
He watches all these resources, the tithes, the indulgence money from starving peasants all over Europe, being absorbed and then circulated. But not for alms. It was being circulated among the managerial elite, the cardinals, their staff, the top administrators. The goal had shifted to just preserving the institution and funding their lavish lifestyles.
That feeling Matteo had, that disillusionment, that's a perfect historical example of Robert Michels's Iron Law of Oligarchy.
It is. A concept he came up with centuries later, but it fits perfectly. Michels' line was brutal and simple. Who says organization says oligarchy.
Meaning that even the most democratic grassroots group is doomed to be taken over by a small elite.
Inevitably. And here's the really counterintuitive part. This drift towards oligarchy isn't caused by failure. It's caused by success, by growth.
Okay, you have to walk us through the mechanics of that, because this explains so much about why modern nonprofits and political movements end up looking just like the systems they wanted to replace.
Right. So the first mechanic is just complexity and delegation. An organization gets bigger, a political party, a global NGO, whatever. Suddenly, you can't have every member vote on every tiny decision. It's impossible.
Inefficient.
Totally. So you have to delegate authority to a smaller group, an elite. And for the sake of efficiency, you have to empower them to make decisions with very little input from the members.
And just by doing that, they start to control the agenda.
Exactly. Which leads to the second mechanic, administrative secrets. As things get more complex, you need specialized knowledge to run the place. How the budget works, who holds political influence, the operational details. The leaders gain power by controlling this insider knowledge.
The administrative secrets.
Right. And this makes it almost impossible for a regular rank-and-file member to meaningfully challenge their decisions. How can you? You don't have the information.
So if I'm a small dollar donor to a big climate group, How on earth am I supposed to know if the CEO's $500,000 salary is justified?
You have no way of knowing. And the longer those leaders stay in power, the more of the secret knowledge they accumulate, and the harder they are to replace. They basically make themselves indispensable.
And that leads to the final piece, the vested interests. This is where the motivation really shifts.
Yes. That initial investment in psychic capital, in the cause, it starts to get replaced by a material interest. These leaders now have high status, high-paying jobs. Loss of that position would be a financial disaster for them. So their main goal shifts from advancing the cause to simply protecting their own positions and benefits.
Goal displacement. The organization now exists to serve the elite running it.
That's the Iron Law in action. And it's why the term nonprofit is such a powerful piece of propaganda today.
How do you mean?
Just hearing the word nonprofit grants instant moral authority. It just shuts down our critical thinking. We assume they must be working for the public good, no matter what the evidence says.
But the reality is this massive nonprofit industrial complex that's handling billions in public money with very little real oversight.
And that lack of oversight leads to some truly perverse incentives. The affordable housing crisis in San Francisco is a perfect case study.
Okay, let's get into it. You have an organization like Todco, an affordable housing nonprofit.
Their stated mission is to provide housing for low-income people. And yet they haven't built any new housing in decades, and they actively lobby politicians to block the construction of new housing by other developers.
Okay, wait, stop there. Why would a housing nonprofit lobby against building more housing? That makes absolutely no sense.
It makes perfect financial sense because of the way government subsidies are structured. These NGOs actually make more money when rents in the area go up.
Wow.
Because government subsidies pay the difference between the low rent the tenant pays and the rising market rate. So a high rent environment, which is caused by a housing shortage, means bigger government checks for the nonprofit.
Oh my God. So their revenue, their profit, is directly tied to the failure of the housing market. They have the same incentive as a landlord who wants rents to go up.
Precisely. And that public money then gets funneled into the organization. In the Todco case, their revenues went up, and they used it to quadruple executive pay and increase their lobbying budget by 95 times. They're using taxpayer money to lobby the politicians who give them the money to keep the system that gives them the money going.
It's a closed loop, a self-perpetuating kickback scheme.
It is, and this isn't some one-off thing. In Seattle, a lobbying group for affordable housing nonprofits openly fought against a new public social housing developer, not because they don't believe in social housing.
Because it would be competition.
It would compete for their government funding. They prefer the complex, privatized system because it benefits their established managerial class, even if a public system would be more efficient at actually housing people.
And when you have that much money flowing with so little oversight, you get straight-up fraud.
The examples are just shocking. In San Francisco, the CEO of one nonprofit, Gwendolyn Westbrook, was caught stealing taxpayer money to buy cars for herself and house her friends and family in subsidized apartments meant for the poor.
And the worst part is, the city should have known.
She had a prior conviction for stealing money while working for the city. A convicted thief was handed millions in public funds to run a nonprofit, and, well, the result was predictable. The nonprofit label acted like a shield.
It's not just fraud either. It's just staggering incompetence.
Look at Seattle again. A $3 million no-bid contract went to a nonprofit for a racial equity study. The executive director had a conviction for gang rape. The finance director had convictions for robbery.
You can't make this stuff up.
You really can't. The project lead was paid $300 an hour while claiming to be a volunteer. Another big homelessness nonprofit with millions in grants had an unlicensed accountant, and get this, their treasurer was an unqualified homeless man who lived in a tent.
So a man living in a tent was the chief financial officer for $1 million public-funded organization.
When you see that, you're not looking at bad luck. You're looking at a systemic failure caused by outsourcing core public services.
Which leads directly to this idea of the progressive doom loop.
This is so important for understanding why some of our cities are in crisis. In practice, a lot of modern progressivism acts like an extremist libertarian movement when it comes to the state. They love funding public programs, they'll vote for high taxes, but they are deeply opposed to centralized government power actually running those programs.
So the government becomes just a tax collector that funnels the money to this chaotic web of unaccountable nonprofits.
Exactly, and you get massive inefficiencies. These groups don't have economies of scale or real accountability. So in San Francisco, spending on homelessness goes from $200 million to over $1 billion in 5 years, with nothing to show for it. High taxes, poor services. So people leave. The tax base shrinks.
We're seeing this in Portland with the trash crisis. They cut city street sweeping
in favor of outsourcing trash cleanup to expensive, belief-driven nonprofits. The result is residents pay a fortune in taxes for services they don't get. Disorder rises, and the whole thing spirals downward, all while the nonprofit industrial complex is completely insulated from the consequences.
That moment of crisis, when a system starts to collapse, is when the pragmatists show up. Let's go back to the Reformation again. To Jacob, the textile merchant in Augsburg. This guy didn't care about theology. He cared about his balance sheet.
Jacob's story is the perfect example of how a so-called revolution of ideas is often really just a financial resource transfer. He was a pure financial actor. For years, he invested in the dominant ideology, the church, because that's where the power and the contracts were.
His loyalty was transactional.
Completely. But when the circulation of elites began, when the Protestant princes started challenging Rome, Jacob didn't read Luther's 95 Theses. He read his financial ledgers.
And what did they tell him?
He saw that the new rising elite was using a new belief system, Protestantism, to achieve a very material goal: seize the church's vast land holdings and, crucially, stop the flow of German gold to Rome. It was a resource war disguised as a moral crusade.
So he pivoted.
He pivoted hard. He stopped funding the old system and started funding the new one. He invested in the reformers' printing presses. He did what he had to do to stay close to the new center of power and resource distribution.
And his story just shows that what looks like a revolution to the masses is often just one elite group replacing another, using popular anger to justify a massive transfer of assets.
We see the same thing today. Powerful donors, the modern Jacobs, they switch their allegiance between political parties or movements not because they had a sudden change of heart, but to make sure they still have access to power and contracts after the next election.
This brings us right back to the problem with trying to intervene in these ideological markets.
Absolutely. The supply of the true believers, the ones driven by that psychic capital, it's inelastic. But if policymakers suddenly start throwing money at a cause, you just attract the Jacobs, the mercenary actors.
You invite the for-profits in disguise.
And you just end up politicizing the whole sector. It creates these adversarial profit opportunities. If the government starts funding one side, an opposing elite will immediately form their own nonprofits to capture resources and fight back. It just fuels the fire. Neutrality is often the only stable policy.
Now, this whole problem, oligarchy, elites, using a system for their own gain, it's not just about nonprofits or history. It's happening right in the heart of modern capitalism, in publicly held corporations.
This is the critical insight of Berlin Means from back in the 1930s, the separation of ownership and control. In a big corporation, the stockholders are the nominal owners, but the actual control is held by the managers, the agents.
So it's the same structure, a small elite operating with self-interest, often at the expense of the thousands of owners. It's the corporate version of the Iron Law.
It's the exact same dynamic. And the managers maintain control using the same tools Michael's identified. They control the proxy voting process, they control the flow of information to the board, those are the administrative secrets, and they gain power through long tenure and by appointing their friends to the board.
They insulate themselves from any real challenge.
They do, and we see the results most clearly in things like executive pay and financial games.
Let's talk about the golden parachute, the severance package that pays CEOs a fortune for failing.
The golden parachute is the ultimate expression of this. It's the modern Cardinal's Palace, funded by the stockholders' tithes. Get this, the CEO of Pfizer in 2006. The stock went down nearly 37% under his leadership.
So he failed.
By any objective measure. He walked away with an exit package of over $200 million.
$200 million. For losing value for the owners. That's just insane.
Yeah. Or Robert Nardelli at Home Depot. Fired. The stock price didn't increase at all during his 7 years there. His severance, $210 million. This is the managerial elite maximizing their own benefit, completely disconnected from the interests of the actual owners.
It's a tax on the stockholders. And it's not just the exit packages. It's how they manipulate their pay while they're still there.
Right. Things like backdating stock options, granting options retroactively to a date when the stock price was at a low point. It's pure insider dealing, using their administrative secrets to guarantee a massive personal profit that an average stockholder could never get.
So whether it's a medieval cardinal, a modern nonprofit CEO, or a corporate executive, the pattern is exactly the same.
The small elite uses the institutional machinery, whether it's religious, bureaucratic, or financial, to extract resources and direct them toward themselves, always at the expense of the members or owners at the bottom. And that's really the inescapable conclusion from all of this. That core lesson from 16th century Europe is just as true today as it was then. The second any belief system, whatever it is, gets successfully monetized to support an institutional elite, the cause itself becomes secondary. The preservation and enrichment of that managerial class becomes the real mission. The money dictates the mission.
So what we've really traced here is this timeless, incredibly adaptive pattern. The friar's little piece of parchment became an urgent email asking for $5. The tithes became a government subsidy. The People Curia in Rome became corporate headquarters in New York. The extraction mechanism gets more sophisticated, the language gets updated, but the fundamental drive using institutional power and collective belief for private, elite gain that has remained stubbornly consistent for 500 years.
The challenge, then, for anyone who actually cares about a cause is to recognize that the power of belief is a form of capital, and that capital can, and almost always will, be turned into a financial vehicle by the very people who claim to speak on its behalf, ultimately shifting resources away from the cause and toward the new center of control.